Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have Chris Maxwell, who lives in Calgary, Alberta. Chris is an avid mountain hunter and has harvested his stone, his doll, and his rocky mountain bighorn, and still is after the desert. Chris is a member of the Canadian Sheep Foundation and is just an avid sheep nut. And we're going to be doing a podcast today on going guided. And Chris has a whole extensive outline and has really thought this over on going guided. And I thought this would be a good episode for the listeners out there that maybe haven't been on many guided hunts or thinking about going on a guided hunt. So we're going to kind of dive into the weeds on this one. Chris, how you doing?
Good. Yourself, Jay?
Oh, doing just fine. If you would, give a little background on yourself and your love for mountain hunting, and where that's led, different places that's led you to, and the adventure of mountain hunting.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually grew up in Saskatchewan, which is basically just known for big whitetail hunting. Basic is what everyone thinks of when they think of Saskatchewan. It's total prairie, no mountain animals whatsoever. But after I graduated from university, I moved to Alberta to work in the oil field. And of course, we got over-the-counter bighorn sheep tags here, and all kinds of mountain hunting. And after the first trip I went on with a friend of mine, I was absolutely hooked from day one. Just the whole challenge of it. And, there was no guarantees you were going to get something. It was actually quite difficult, especially for someone new to it that didn't have a whole lot of experience. And as I got more into the sheep hunting, I eventually joined the board of directors on the Alberta Wild Sheep Foundation, and still on it today. And I try to attend a lot of conventions and talk to fellow sheep hunters, and there's a lot of pretty prolific sheep hunters within the Wild Sheep Foundation and some of these other hunting organizations. So it's been a really good opportunity for me to connect with like-minded people.
Yeah, for sure. And so you've harvested your stone sheep and your rocky and your doll. Out of those three, what would you say, which one of those was your hardest?
So I'm going to say the doll was by far the hardest, and it wasn't the hardest because the mountain was the worst or whatnot. It was the hardest because it was a 21-day backpack hunt. We had nothing but mountain house teat the entire time, and I never harvested my ram until day 17. So the day I actually got my sheep, we were so out of energy, and we had to climb this, wasn't even that bad of a mountain, to pop over the top to get on top of them. And, it felt like we had climbed Everest by the time we got to the top, just because we had no energy and we're essentially starving to death on mountain house after 17 days. But we got it done, and the pack out was probably the worst one I've ever experienced, just because, like I said, we have no energy left. But it was an adventure, though.
Was that your first of sheep?
Yeah, it was actually the first sheep I actually harvested. I had hunted on my own for bighorns in my home province of Alberta for a few years before I went to Alaska, and I had never pulled the trigger on a bighorn. I had a chance to take a couple of rams, but they were young, and I just don't want to shoot a young ram. I'd prefer at least an 8-year-plus-year-old sheep, regardless if it's legal or not. So that was actually the first sheep hunt I'd been on that I'd actually was successful on.
How did your feet hold up after that 17 days?
So prior to that trip, I'd never had a proper pair of hiking boots. And about 4 months before that trip, I bought a pair of hand wags. And, there's a lot of high-end boots out there, but that hand wag just fit my foot perfectly. And, through the water, up and down, and my feet never were wet once, and I never had a single blister that entire trip. And I actually still had, that was in 2012 we did that trip. and I'm still using the same pair of boots today. I just, treat it, like wipe them down, treat them with waterproofing and all the rest of it. And I've used that pair of boots, I want to say, on over a dozen sheep hunts, and I've yet to have a blister, and my favorite pair of boots by far. But, there's all kinds of brands of boots out there, but I would say, pick a good pair of boots, like one of the better quality boots, but pick the one that fits your foot the best.
And I think, something you said there, I mean, there, the boots that you've worn, like you said, there's a lot of other boots that may fit your foot and what have you, but you found one that works for your foot, and it's like, how finicky it can be, and you've probably heard the horror stories of people and their feet, but you found a boot that works for you, and you're just sticking with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I equate it to like a backpack as well. I've gone through almost every backpack manufacturer there is, and I finally got one where the harness just fits like absolutely perfect, and I'm just sticking with it. It's same thing with boots. The boots are on a mountain hunt. I'm going to say that's probably one of your top three pieces of gear. If you don't have a pair of boots that fits you, it doesn't matter how much they cost or what the brand name is, you're not going to last long.
Chris, I apologize for the noise in the background. I don't know if you can hear it, but where I live here in Colorado in the summer, at random times, a guy comes by with a blower. It's part of the homeowners association. It decides to blow off all of the streets and what have you, and he's happened to pick right in front of our house right when we're talking here. So if it's bad, I apologize. Okay. Today, so you have extensive background as being a mountain hunter. You love those mountain hunts, and but you have a whole outline that you've prepared and done a lot of thinking on going guided. And I just thought I'd kind of turn it over to you, and I'll interject where I can and ask you questions. But you've put a lot of time into this, going guided. My first question would be, kind of what got you started in trying to, create an outline and help other people, picking a guide and what have you, picking in the right outfitter and what have you.
Yeah. So one of the big criticisms, I guess, that I've always heard from people that have never gone on a guided trip is that, it's kind of like you're just paying to kill an animal. It's guaranteed and whatnot. And it's absolutely not true whatsoever. So I kind of, I do write for a column for Big Game Illustrated, and they're actually publishing a series, like the series, I'm calling it Going Guided, in there. But really, I wanted like the average person that maybe has never done one of these trips to kind of get an insight to what it's actually like and what it's all about. It's not a guaranteed kill. It's not a guaranteed hunt. It's not, putting your feet up and watching TV every night and going out and just pulling the trigger, or at least it doesn't have to be that way. It's really about expanding your opportunities and understanding why you would actually pay money to go on a guided hunt yourself versus just do DIY all the time. And like I've done a ton of DIY hunts. I'm not exclusively a guy that goes guided every trip I go on, but there's a ton of benefits to it, and I really wanted people to understand why you would choose this option and kind of debunk some of the myths that it's a sure thing. And really, the beginning of my experience with going on a guided trip came when I moved to Alberta. When you're a kid in high school or college, you got all kinds of time to just go hunting, take every weekend you want. But as I got older, had a family and whatnot, and I had friends that started getting families. You make plans for a weekend, and they call you an hour before you're ready to go out, and they have to cancel. Something came up, or, lots of other things in life pop up and kind of get in the way, and your plans are changed or canceled. And so really that was kind of the tipping point for me when I decided to look into it. Was I was just tired of my hunting partners bailing out, and because usually on these mountain trips, they're backpack trips, and you're carrying some gear, your partner's carrying some gear, and if one of you can't go, it's probably doesn't make sense to go out there, because if you do get something down, you're not going to be able to get it out on your own very easily. So that's really when I started picking up the phone and talking to a few of the local outfitters and asking them, like, what would this cost if I came as a resident, had my own tag? Like, really, I just needed a horse and a hunting partner and a wall tent, and that's kind of how it all started.
One question that comes to mind when I hear that is, so before you went on a guided hunt, were you one of these people that were super adamant DIY, like I'm a DIY, and put your foot down, and didn't have an open mind to doing a guided hunt? And if so, how did you make the transformation to thinking that, okay, maybe I need to branch out a little bit?
Yeah, so I'd say I used to be of that mindset, like I can do this myself. And where I grew up, quote, rich Americans were the only ones that ever came up and did guided hunts. Like a friend of mine, his dad was an outfitter for deer, and they'd have all these guys from Texas and whatnot coming up every fall, and throwing down big tips for them, giving them their rifles at the end of the trips. Like, and I just remember being like, wow, these guys are so rich, right? and then so that's kind of what my perception was. But after I got working for a living, started working, and I never ruled out going on a guided hunt, but I never had really thought of doing one locally, like in my own province or state. I'd always thought, one day I'd like to go to Alaska or the Yukon, maybe get a moose or something like that I couldn't get at home. But eventually that evolved into looking at resident opportunities. And like I said, it really, what kind of the straw that broke the camel's back into really pursuing this was that some of my hunting partners had bailed on me in the last minute before we were supposed to go. And, after you take a week's vacation and you're ready to walk out the door and all of a sudden they're not going, it kind of spoils the whole trip for you. So that was, like I said, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And for me, maybe opening my mind up to it and starting to investigate some of these options.
Yeah, for sure. Now that you've gone on a few guided hunts, what are the benefits that you see of going on guided hunts?
Well, I guess the biggest benefit that I've found is you don't have to rely on a buddy to be able to go. If you're going with an outfitter, they're going to be there. And so that's a huge one there, just having like that reliability.
So are you saying, like, in essence, you're saying like the outfitter almost becomes your hunting partner, or your guide that you're going with almost becomes your hunting partner for that hunt? And you're looking at it as, if you and a buddy planned it, that's great, but you're looking at it that you're going with an outfitter or a guide, and you're kind of doing this with them. And one thing that make me think is you better like the outfitter or the guide you're going with, but I'm sure that's going to come up later.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I don't want it to make it sound like, I'm just going with an outfitter because I need a hunting buddy, because there's way more to it than that. But when I go on a guided trip, I do not book the trip based on the outfitter. I book the trip based on my guide. When I got my stone sheep, I booked that trip because of the guide that I wanted. And, there's 1,000 outfitters out there, and they all can provide a relative, level of service for the most part. But it's really that guy you're going to be living on the mountain with day in and day out that makes all the difference in the world. So that's kind of what I focus on when I'm looking at who I'm going to hunt with next, is who do I actually want to be on the mountain day after day with. So that's kind of that's a big thing for me. Because like you say, there's no point in being out there with a guy that you can't stand.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess.
What are some of the other benefits you see?
Yeah, so the other benefit is, like for myself anyways, I work at a head office of a big oil company. I'm very busy Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. On the weekends, I've got, 3 young children I got to spend all kinds of time with. So I do not have the time to properly scout a lot of different areas, especially the further into the mountain and backcountry they get. Like the time restraints that I'm under, I just can't do it anymore. Whereas when I was younger, I did have the time to do a bit of that, but now it's almost an impossibility, I would say, to spend a week just scouting. So if you're going with an outfitter and he's in a certain area that you've always wanted to hunt, those guys will know that area. They'll know where to hunt in it. They'll know how to hunt it, the terrain, where the glassing spots are. You're essentially paying for a lot of the legwork that you could have done yourself. You're, I'm going to say, essentially paying for that localized knowledge of the area. And if it's a new species you've never hunted as well, hunting a sheep is different than hunting a mule deer, is different than hunting an elk, is different than hunting a antelope. Like, all these animals take specialized skills. And if you've never hunted a sheep before, you can't just show up on the mountain and think you're going to have a chance at getting one. It typically doesn't work. The odd guy might get lucky, but you have to really learn how to hunt those species. And if you don't know how to hunt a certain species, that guide, he'll know the area and he'll know how to hunt that animal. So that's a huge benefit, in my opinion, especially if it's a specialty animal like a sheep that you might not get a lot of opportunity to hunt for the average guy. Like in BC and Alberta here, we're pretty fortunate because we can get these over-the-counter tags. But, if you're in the lower 48 and you pull a once-in-a-lifetime tag, I think you'd be crazy not to look at getting some localized knowledge anyway for that tag.
For sure. One question I want to bounce back to something you said. It's a little bit off topic, but you said you work in the oil fields.
Yep.
That always intrigues me. What exactly do you do, and how long have you been doing it?
Okay. So actually, I work for a pipeline company, TransCanada Pipelines, and specifically on the Keystone project. Right now, we're kind of in a holding pattern till get the next round of permits going. But before that, I actually worked in the oil sands for about 7 years. And but even in high school and university, I had worked for other pipelining companies, doing pipeline maintenance and things like that. So I've always kind of been on this pipeline side of the fence, with the exception of my time in the oil sands, I guess.
And when you say oil sands, what does that mean?
That's like Fort McMurray, or I guess in the U.S., like a lot of the environmentalists will call it the tar sands. And it's basically this huge basin in northern Alberta where oil basically saturates this layer of sand. Like, it's like a big band at a certain depth, and they'll essentially mine it, I guess, and run it through the processing plants and get the oil out of the sand itself.
So in other words, they're extracting oil out of the sand, and I would assume that there's sand deposits after they extract the oil out, and so I bet they have a very complex process to do that.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex process, and like when you see the side of the mine cut, it's like a layer of clean sand, a band of oil sands, and then above it, it's like all clean sand again. So it's this very specific band in the strata, and they grind it up, and there's all the processing that they do to get it coming out the other side is pretty extensive. But when it comes out, the syn crude, or synthetic crude is what they call it, and it actually is almost the color of diesel. So there's not a whole lot of refining that they have to do after it, but yeah, it's quite a fascinating area and process and whatnot. So,
And then, did you study in college to do what you're doing now?
so I'm in project controls. So what that is, because most people haven't heard that term, we do like the cost, the schedule, the progressing of a lot of these major projects. And in school and university, I actually got my business degree. And as I was looking for a job with my degree, I actually went to Fort McMurray to the oil sands and got my electrical ticket as well. So I'm a journeyman electrician with a business degree, and that kind of all translated into working in the major projects for the cost and schedule and progress, because I had been on the ground level, or been in the field, I should say, worked on the tools, got all the technical knowledge and skills and whatnot, and I was able to translate that back to the home office here. So it's not a typical path, I would say, of most college graduates, but man, there's nothing more valuable than learning how to work with your hands and seeing what it actually takes to build some of this stuff.
For sure. And so, like, now your everyday, stuff that you're doing every day now, are you out in the field, working with your hands, or are you more in the office? What do you do?
It's basically 100% in the office now. Whenever we do have a major project, we'll have, like, my counterpart will be on site with the contractors at say a pump station or at a pipeline right away or something like that. And I will go out to the field periodically for meetings with them and see how things are progressing in the field. But for the most part, I am in the home office here now.
Okay, and these pipelines you discussed, you mentioned the Keystone.
Yeah.
A little bit of education here, and this just intrigues me, so
Yeah.
I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but where is the oil coming from and where is it going?
So most of the oil, at least on our system, is coming from northern Alberta.
So Chris, you were telling me about your job, and then your building actually had a fire drill, and the whole building was evacuated.
Yeah.
Before that happened, I think I asked you the question, where is the oil coming from and where is it going?
Yeah, so it's actually coming from primarily from northern Alberta, from the oil sands, and going all through the central U.S. down to Cushing, Oklahoma, which is one of the major hubs in the U.S., and then from Cushing down to the Gulf Coast refineries in Galveston and Texas City and those areas. There's also a few feeder pipelines and other refineries in the U.S. that it picks up oil from and delivers off to as well. So, yeah, that's primarily where all the oil ends up, is in that greater Houston area.
Okay, interesting. Back to our outline and back to kind of our topic of, going guided.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about some of the benefits of going guided.
Yep.
And then why don't you take it away with starting it out, planning your first guided hunt?
Yep, for sure. Well, the one other point I was going to make too, for some of the benefits of guided, before we keep moving on, was it does give you the opportunity to hunt other species as well. If you're a guy from the Midwest, you basically are going to have to go with an outfitter to hunt a mountain goat. You just can't walk into a place like BC or whatnot and buy an over-the-counter tag for that. So it really does open up a big window of opportunity to hunt for some other species you may not have actually had an opportunity at before. So that was one other thing I just really wanted to mention as well, for just some of the benefits.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, so starting out on going on a guided trip, I made the mistake, and I'm calling it a mistake now, looking at it in hindsight, of booking a trip to Alaska. So that is a big trip if you're from the lower 48, but it's even a bigger trip if you're from Canada like I am, because now it's not just traveling to another area, it's firearm permits, it's export permits for the wildlife. It's an extra layer of complexity. What I should have done was I should have booked like a small trip, like say a black bear hunt or a antelope hunt or something a lot less substantial that would have taken a lot less planning to get my feet wet. A smaller trip like that, you're still going to have like, asking the outfitter the same types of questions. You're still going to encounter the same types of issues, but on a much smaller scale. And if something does go wrong, you're maybe out a little bit of money versus like a huge Alaskan trip where you're going to be out a whole ton of money. And, it was kind of like when my friend and we actually did a 2-on-1 up there, 21-day backpack trip. We had tags for 3 species each. And, we were, in my opinion, we didn't ask all the right questions before we went, and we were in way over our head. Luckily, on the back end, like we had done enough research that we knew who to talk to. We'd even called the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Office and got a specific person's name. So when we were ready to leave Alaska and come back to Alberta here, we had their export permits lined up. We had all the firearm permits we needed figured out. So that piece of it went smooth. But the trip itself, though, we had some challenges, but it was a lot to do with we didn't really know what to expect.
What was those 3 species?
I had tags for a grizzly, a moose, and a Dall sheep, and my hunting partner there that came up with me, he had the Dall sheep, the grizzly, and a caribou tag.
Okay.
Yeah, and at the end of it, we both got our Dall sheep. We got a double header actually on that day, and my friend got a nice representative caribou, and I could have taken a moose, but the guide told me, lay off the trigger, we can do better. And then, of course, we never ended up getting one. But to his credit, we did see an absolute monster the next day. So, we potentially could have come up with pretty good moose, but I kind of did regret not taking the one, like the one that was in hand at the time, but hindsight's 20/20. So
sure.
Yeah. So like I was mentioning, when you're starting out, I would recommend really taking off on something that's manageable. And I would even say go with to an area where you can actually drive possibly to the place. Just take the whole airlines out of the whole equation. It just makes it that much simpler. And, get things figured out on a small trip, maybe 2. And then if if your dream is like the big Alaskan adventure or some Canadian wilderness hunt, then, that's the next step.
Okay.
In my opinion. So, then, once you kind of figured out what you plan on that you want to do, I guess the next step is booking your trip. And, when you go to book your trip, this is really what's going to make the difference between the trip of a lifetime or an absolute catastrophe. And, like on your podcast, you have a lot of outfitters come on and these guys, and they talk about stuff, and they're probably in the top tier of outfitters, and they're well known. But there really is a lot of guys that are, take 2-3 hunters a year, just hang a shingle up, make a few bucks on the side. So do your due diligence, really know who you're getting involved with when you decide to choose an outfitter. And like I had mentioned before, when I book a trip, I book it more based on who my guide's going to be versus who the outfitter is. Like, obviously, if the outfitter's got a bad reputation across the board, then, that's a outfit to stay away from. But all things being equal, I, for the most part, research the guides as much as I do the outfit, and kind of pick who I actually want to
What's
be out
your
in the field
thoughts
with.
on when you're researching a hunt and you go online and say you find one negative review and some guy's all bent out of shape and this, that, and the other? Does that hold as much weight to you as if maybe obviously you found, a bunch of really good reviews and then you've got one guy that's obviously had a bad trip? I mean, is there any margin of error that you look at, or if any one outfitter has any negative, do you automatically, you know, try and look for someone else, or do you know how human nature is
Yeah,
sometimes where you can just get some guy and
yeah,
for whatever reason he's all bent out of shape, but really maybe the problem was on his side and he's
yeah,
just trying to make excuses. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah. So like I've hunted with some big outfits, and I've hunted with some small outfits, and some well-known ones and some basically unknown ones. And I can tell you, virtually every outfit, if they've been in business for any amount of time, will have a negative review somewhere along the line from some unhappy client. And I've done enough of these hunts now to kind of be able to read between the lines on some of these comments. And, some of them, if it's only one or two, it's usually something to the effect like, the guy never got an animal, so he's blaming it on the guide or the outfitter, or potentially there was weather issues involved, things out of their control. Most outfitters that I have come across that are like the better outfitters, if something happens on your trip, and it's their fault and whatnot, they will either bring you back again, or they will make it right somehow. The fly-by-night guys, maybe not so much, but I've found that some of the, I don't want to say poor quality outfitters, but there's some outfitters that have a bad reputation. It's not just the odd negative comment. It'll be extensive across the board, and you'll see like it on social media. You'll see it on some of these like Go Hunt type of reviews, and like all these different sites that rate outfitters. There'll be all kinds of comments about them, and it's not just an isolated incident. But if you want to hunt with a specific outfitter and you're researching them online and you find one negative review, I wouldn't automatically write them off. There's a lot of keyboard warriors out there that talk tough behind the keyboard, but if they had to say it to the guy's face, they never would.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think that's important to note that, like you said, if you've been in business long enough, you're going to have someone that was not happy with whatever situation. And,
yeah,
you may never hear a review from them, or they may be the loudest critic out there. But I like to
yeah,
try and give guys benefit of the doubt, or I might even talk to them and say, hey, there's a
yeah,
guy so and so, and he's saying this. Like, what's your side of it? So, I mean, there, as we know, there's always two sides to every story, and I'm not defending any out. I mean, I am an outfitter. I'm not defending outfitters, but
yeah,
like in anything else, I would say, and I think most people can read between the lines pretty well. But give the fellow man a break, and maybe get his side of the story of what happened, and you might find out that, hey, the guy's saying, well, the guy missed 5 times, and he couldn't go more than a mile, and
yeah,
he was totally out of shape, and this is a mountain hunt, and I'm not sure what he expected, but he was not prepared for the hunt.
yeah,
I know that happens a lot.
yeah. And like, I'll just give you one example of that, because I've got a lot of friends that are guides as well. And my one friend, he was quite young. He's about, I want to say 23 to 25 at the time. And he was a wrangler, and he wanted his big chance at being the guide. And, guy rolls into camp, and he was 400 pounds. And of course that ends up being his first client. And just to get him on the horse, they had to get the biggest, like, I can't remember the breed, but it was one of the biggest horses you could possibly get. And the guy had to walk up a couple stairs or stumps to even get on this thing. And amazingly enough, my buddy there got him so close to getting a ram. All he had to do was walk 20 yards up a hill and a fairly steep incline. And 3 hours later, he still wasn't at the top of it. And the ram was bedded there all day. And, he just never made it to the top at the end of the day. So, that guy, I don't know if he complained bitterly at the end of the trip or not, but, his physical ability was so bad that it was his fault that he never got a ram. And I've heard lots of stories about guys not being able to shoot and whatnot, but from the guides that I have actually hunted with, those guys are dialed in. They know their animals, they know how to hunt them, they know how to find them, and if the client doesn't get an animal, it's usually not because of something they did. That's what I found anyways. So like you said, it's got to be taken with a grain of salt, these online reviews, because I like to give people the benefit of the doubt as well, and even, like you say, call the outfitter and ask them about that specific instance, and their version of the story is probably a little different than the guy that's complaining.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes when you give an outfitter or give a person to give their side of the story, I think a lot of times that also tells what kind of person they are. If they say, well, yeah, it was a misfortunate situation and here's, kind of what happened. Or if the guy says, oh, yeah, da 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 da, and then he gets on his own horse, then sometimes that sends up red flags to me, like, I want to hunt with someone that is, has a lot of grace, and someone that is willing to, there's a lot of times someone's booking a hunt with me because they're not as experienced as I am. So for me to get on my horse and talk about, my level of experience, there's certainly, I like it when I talk to people and, bring up an unfortunate situation and they say, here's what happened, and, but they don't attack the person. So I think that's something to, just kind of watch if you do get in that situation and you interview someone, if they go on the attack and, try and put all of the blame on the hunter and they don't take any of the blame and, they don't accept any of the responsibility, that might throw a red flag up for me as well.
Yeah, for sure. And like I've mentioned before, I do know one situation where a friend of mine went on a fairly substantial trip, and it was for a stone sheep, and the guide that he had was pretty inexperienced, and at the end of the trip he never got a ram, and he was even finding more stone sheep than the guide. And anyone that's hunted stone sheep will tell you they're probably the most difficult sheep species to pick out of the rocks, just their coloration and whatnot. So they're quite difficult to find if your eye's not trained for that. And he was picking up, more sheep than the guide was, which is very unusual in that situation. And the outfitter made it right, brought him back the next year, and he got his ram. But so in that situation, the outfitter took some responsibility, or I don't want to say blame, but he took some responsibility for the hunt not working out, and was gracious enough to bring the guy back and made good on it. So, which he never had to do, but it was I thought pretty highly of him for doing that.
For sure. So you're talking about starting out and planning your hunt, and you're saying make your first guided hunt maybe a smaller hunt, maybe something that you can drive to, kind of eliminate the airlines, eliminate, some of the stuff that you have no control over. And then once you get comfortable with a couple of those hunts, then go ahead and book some of those big adventure hunts, in other countries and what have you.
Yeah, I would like I guess it's just like anything else. Like, you got to learn the ropes, and you can read all you want about how to do stuff, and people write columns and articles all the time about like travel hunting and what to look for and what this and that. But until you've actually done it, you just can't be ready. Like it's kind of like going on your first sheep hunt. Until you've actually done it, you have no idea what you're really in for. Um, it's just totally a totally different way to travel than you normally ever would. So that'd be my recommendation anyway. And I've talked to a few of my friends that have done a few trips, and they all have said the same thing. Like, and when I say a smaller trip, I'm not even necessarily talking about the price tag. I'm talking about, like you were just saying, eliminate the airlines, something small, probably no more than a week long and whatnot. Because there are some, I'm going to call them adventure hunts, that are big trips, even though they're not expensive, like a caribou trip up in the Northern Territories, or like a muskox hunt that I just came back from. They're not overly expensive, but they're a huge trip, huge logistical challenges, huge adventure, but not something I'd recommend for a first-time travel hunter or guy that's going guided for the first time.
You bring up that muskox hunt. Didn't you shoot a giant?
Yeah, actually, I just had it scored for SCI this past weekend, and it looks like it's going to be number 23 all time in the book for that. And I'm getting it scored for Boone and Crockett here this week coming up, and just based on the entries that have been in the current record book and some of the measurements I've taken myself at home, they're obviously not official, but I think it's going to be in the top 20 all-time Boone and Crockett as well. So
that's phenomenal. Did you freeze your balls off up there?
It was cold. It was 35 below Celsius. I'm not sure what that equates to in Fahrenheit, but it's frickin' cold.
Oh my gosh.
It was minus 60 Celsius just a few weeks before we went up there. And like, I grew up on the prairies in Saskatchewan, and we had that kind of temperatures as when I was growing up as a kid. So I kind of knew how to dress and what to expect and how to not get frostbite and freeze and whatnot. So I was fairly comfortable because we were spending 12 plus hours a day outside.
On snowmobiles or what?
Yeah. So how they hunt those is typically on this trip we went on, we were specifically looking for some herds that my friend actually owned the outfit. So he was telling me they found these new herds that they didn't know existed or were there before. So we were going to hunt this kind of fresh group of muskox that no one's hunted for decades, as far as they know. And we actually had to snowmobile 8 hours across the Arctic Ocean to get to where our base camp was.
Okay, now are you on your own machine or are you riding with someone?
So there was two options. We could have rented our own machine, or the other option is the Inuit pull these 16-foot long freighter sleds, and the freighter sled has like a seat, and I don't want to say it's like a lazy boy, but it's kind of like well cushioned, and you just sit there and relax. I shouldn't say relax either. It's pretty rough, but look around. So I chose to just ride in the freighter sled. The one buddy that came up on that trip with me, he rented his own machine. But at the end of it, I was glad that I chose just to ride in the freighter sled because I had like a windscreen and was kind of sheltered. And he was like, his face is red from the.
Was he following you?
We were kind of riding like side by side, yeah.
And he'd look over at you, and you'd be like, "Yeah, I got a screen over here, buddy."
Yeah, pretty much. Man, it was freaking cold though. Like, but what a trip! Like,
what did you see out on the ice? Like, is it like blue ice or is it snow or like what? And then what would you see? Like polar bears? What were you?
So we actually found two inland grizzlies all the way up there. The area we were, they said the odd polar bear will roll through, but not many in that specific area. And the one guy got chased by the grizzly, and they jumped on the snowmobile and started driving away. And he kind of turned the camera behind him and clicked the picture, and the thing was maybe 20 yards full out charge at him.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so
A
it was
big
pretty.
one?
Oh yeah, it was a monster. Like it was a huge bear, and then we actually ended up shooting a seal on the ocean. So that was pretty neat. And the Inuit said we were the first, like they call everybody that's not Inuit a sport hunter.
Mm-hmm.
So they said we were the first sport hunters that he knew of that had ever gotten a seal through the ice like that.
What kind of seal was it?
It was a ring seal, I think they called it. It was about 200 pounds. It's a pretty good size one.
And okay, lots of questions here. So
Yeah.
you're driving on the ice. How thick is the ice? Do you ever see water, or is it just solid? Like, does it look just like, perfect, land? Like, you're not worried, or are
yeah.
you seeing spots of water and you're like, holy crap, this thing, like.
Yeah. So we were there before breakup. So like when the ice freezes up there, like the wind's blowing and stuff. So it's like these big, like, ice shelves and like upheaval ice, but the ice is super thick. I can't remember how thick the guide said. He said it was like 8 or 10 feet thick, but he thought that was still shallow from what it normally couldn't get to for depth. So the ice is super thick. And we never seen open water, and there's no like fear of going through.
And is it flat, or is there snow drifts? Like,
it's big snow drifts and ice upheavals and stuff from the ocean that had pushed the ice up. And so it's kind of the ocean itself is actually quite rough, but once you actually get to the tundra, it's flat as a pancake. And for a place that has 10 months a year of winter, there's hardly any snow. Like we were at the end of winter before any of the melting had started, and the snow was only about 4 inches thick. And that kind of explained to me anyways how the muskox lived there all year, because I was like, well, how can these huge mammals live up there with all that snow? But there's actually not a lot of snow there. And,
what do they eat?
It's basically grass. I kicked a bunch of the snow away to kind of see what was on the tundra, and it's really just grass, like a short grass. And there's actually a lot of it there. And for people that don't know, a muskox is like after we had it skinned out, the closest and boned out and took the meat, the closest animal that I can describe it to is probably a buffalo, but about half the size. So like the one I got was exceptionally large, and it was about 900 pounds.
How old was that sucker?
The Inuit guide I was with didn't really know, but he said for sure 10 plus, 10 years or older. So he said they can live up to about 20, 22 years or something like that.
How thick was their hide?
The hide itself wasn't that thick, but the fur on those things is like a wool, and then it's got the long hair outside of it. So everybody only sees the long hair, but just underneath that long hair, it's like solid wool. And the interesting thing up there, we got a wolf and an Arctic fox as well. So like the wolf up there has wool as well, and same with that Arctic fox. And it's not the wolves up there are nothing like timber wolf with a long, what you typically think a dog hair would look like. It's they got the guard hairs, but it's solid wool underneath those guard hairs. So very well suited and adapted for the climate for sure.
Interesting. Back to the seal. How did you get the seal?
So the Inuit said, because they have these breathe holes on the ocean, and they said, you can sit at one all day long and wait till one comes up, or if it's a sunny day and a little warmer, they'll be up sunning themselves. And the one day it got a little warmer, and when I say a little warmer, I mean like minus 25 instead of minus 35.
Celsius.
Yeah, Celsius, yeah. And, we basically seen it and kind of got within about 200 yards of it, and the one guy I was hunting with, he shot it just at the edge of the ice. But the scary thing with those breathe holes, though, is I got a good picture of one, and the hole looks, maybe 18 inches around. And we reached over with our glove and just pushed the snow beside the hole, and the whole piece went down, and those holes are up to 4 feet round. So if you were walking along and didn't know it was there, you could easily fall into the ocean.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that kind of was a bit of a eye opener and made me a lot more conscientious.
Which is pretty much death. I mean, if you fall in at that temperature, you're wet. You're basically done.
And it's, like I said, 8 hours snowmobile ride to town. So if you fell through, if you got wet to your core, you would be almost guaranteed to perish there. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's.
So did you get your muskox with a rifle or a bow?
I got it with a rifle, and there's a lot. Like, I probably could have got it with a bow. The two other hunters in camp that were friends of mine, they took theirs with archery gear. And after we, like, I was with the one guy when he got his with his bow, and after I kind of figured out the whole program with the muskox, and kind of figured out how to hunt them with a bow, I think anybody could probably do it. But I'm trying to get the Super 10, which is one species category of every animal type in North America, and I wanted to do it with this specific rifle that I have because my dad gave it to me when I was a kid. It was my first big game rifle, so I'm trying to get all the species with that. So
what is it?
Browning 270 A-bolt.
Nice.
Yeah, so I've taken all my sheep with that gun too. So it's just the gun I can't seem to get away from, actually. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is your dad still around?
Yeah, he is. He still hunts with an old 303 British.
Wow, so, cool.
Yeah,
cool. So that sounds like a heck of a trip.
Yeah.
Did you do a lot of the Inuits wear seal hats?
No, but they wear a fur hat, but they're not necessarily seal. And they all wear, for the most part, these big fur mitts that are made out of wolf, or some of them are seal skin. And in town, a lot of them wear like the mucklucks and stuff. But they're, for the most part, wearing modern boots. And the interesting thing, like, those people are so interesting. We got storm stayed in town a day before we hit the ice there, and we went to the local cultural center, and just such a interesting history. They document how they came over the Bering Sea Strait and how they migrated over from the coast of Alaska across to northern Canada. It's very interesting. And but the really interesting thing, our guides, they were both I'm going to call them came from very traditional Inuit families. The one guy, like, they're both in their 50s, mid to late 50s. The one guy was actually born in an igloo. The other guy was actually born in a tent on the tundra, and the only reason he wasn't born in an igloo was because it was summertime when he was born. And these guys have a house. Like, the one guy in particular was very nomadic. He has a house, but he's maybe there 6 weeks a year, and the rest of the time he's going to all their traditional fishing and hunting grounds. And it really gave me a new appreciation for what traditional land use is when the native people start talking about that. Because like, the one guide, like I said, he told me, like, these different spots he went to, and I was just like, that is like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles from the furthest south to the furthest northern tip that he's traveling. And it's just a constant migration all year round, depending on the season. So very interesting people and way of life, and very interesting culture. And like I said, that was probably, on the adventure side, probably one of the biggest adventure trips I've ever been on.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. For sure. Well, congratulations on your giant muskox.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
really cool. Let's talk about booking a hunt.
Yeah. So for booking the trip, there's a lot of key things that you should really know about before you pull the trigger and actually book. Some of them surround like the outfitter's flexibility when it comes to schedule. Like some of them, you have to fly in on a Sunday and you leave on a Sunday. Some of them, you can come in midweek or leave early if you want. Know their refund policies, or if you cancel, have it clearly defined if you're going to get all your money back or what that looks like. Some outfitters will be a lot stickier than others depending on what species it's for. And then the other thing really too you need to know is there other additional species that are available, and is it realistic to get more animals? So I'll just give you a good example. If you're on a sheep hunt in BC, I'm going to use BC for an example. There's usually always extra species you can have a tag for, but what's realistic to take on a sheep hunt? Probably a mountain goat is a realistic expectation, assuming you get your sheep early. And there might be an opportunity where a moose or something you catch in the mountain valley, or a bear maybe, but realistically you're probably looking at a mountain goat as a second species on a trip like that. So the other thing too is if you're a person that's chasing some kind of a slam or whatnot, those secondary species are good to have the tag in your back pocket for them if that's something that you're after. It's just a lot cheaper way to do it, and chances are you will tag out before the last day of your hunt as well, so you might have some time to hunt for an extra animal.
Good stuff there. I'm getting a little scratching, maybe on your microphone. Just watch
Oh, okay.
that.
Is that a little better?
Yeah, I'm sure it's better.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, and another thing that you really want to ask your outfitter about too is what the accommodations are going to be. Like, are you going to be in a backpack tent, a wall tent, a cabin? Do you have to get a hotel a day before the hunt and a day after? What kind of food are you going to be eating? That was a big mistake when we went to Alaska. We knew we were going to be eating Mountain House, like that's just the nature of a backpacking trip, but we didn't realize it was going to be Mountain House 3 times a day, 7 days a week with nothing else kind of.
And that can have an effect on your body. You can either have to go to the bathroom 40 times a day, or you can go 6 days and never even have to use the restroom.
Yeah, and my buddy that came on that trip with me there, yeah, I think he was hiding behind the bush about, like you say, 40 times a day for the first couple of days, and then once he got that kind of out of his system. But the biggest problem I found with Mountain House though is there's just not enough calories in it. So like a 2-person meal has about 600 calories in that. So, considering you're burning probably 5,000 or 6,000 calories a day, you can't even physically eat enough food to replace what you're burning. So that was kind of my key issue with the Mountain House over a long duration of time anyway. But
let's go off on a little bunny trail here. What have you found food-wise on these mountain hunts? What works best for you?
Time and time again, it comes back to like stuff with a lot of almonds in it. Just seems to be like a high protein, high energy source. I've tried those goo packs as well, which I found actually were not bad for energy, but I can't eat more than maybe one a day. If I have a couple of them, I just kind of feel sick, I guess. But
because of the sugar, you think?
I think so. I think that's what it is. But like one a day, it's not bad, and it seems to be like some kind of sustained energy. Lots of like granola bars and stuff like that too. I like, and jerky.
Do you take raw almonds in the field?
I often do, yeah.
Salted or unsalted, or?
I typically do unsalted. I know some guys like the salted because you're sweating and it's kind of replacing some electrolyte. But I found because when I was doing some of these big hikes in the mountains in particular, I was finding I was getting a lot of leg cramps. So I started uh, getting like those electrolyte kind of juice crystals, I guess you'd call them, and putting that in my drink. So those are pretty salty. So between that and the Mountain House and how salty those are, like the rest of my food, I try not to really get stuff that's extra salted, I guess, for myself anyway.
Do you do any Mountain House for your meals, or do you do other meal? What's your meal plan?
So lots of Mountain House, obviously, because it's, I guess, easy and compact and dehydrated, and it's convenient at the end of the day. But lots of bars.
Like
I used
which
to bring
one specifically?
I like the Cliff peanut butter bars. And what I do find though is some of that stuff sits a little heavy in your gut. So if you've got a big hike, it might not be the best thing to eat at the start of it. But when you're going to be sitting down and glassing for a few hours, we'll eat some Cliff bars. I do have a sweet tooth, so I do bring in some chocolate bars. I don't know if like Snickers, Mars bars kind of thing. I don't know how good that is, but it's calories and you're eating and it gives you something anyway. Lots of trail mix type of like nuts and raisins and that kind of stuff. Bit of dehydrated fruit like bananas, maybe some apple chips. And I know there's certain guys like Jason Harrison, who's been on your podcast there, they got all that stuff right down to a science for like, maximum calories and they've got a pretty defined day-to-day meal plan that they use. But I basically just try to pack stuff that I like as well, because I found that I was getting into more of like I need X number of calories in this. And then what I was finding was I didn't really like it and I wasn't eating. So now
then you're just carrying around stuff that you're not eating.
Exactly. And when you get back from a backpack trip, you really should have no food left. And I was finding like, geez, I got an awful lot of stuff in here that I could have replaced with something else that I actually would have eaten. So
that's good stuff. And by the way, the listeners, I am going to be doing a podcast with Jason and Brendan, and they're going to go over their actual piece by piece food list for their upcoming hunt. I've actually gotten quite a few requests to get them to give their food, and so they're going to be doing that here coming up. So
yeah, no, that'll be really interesting. And like I'm constantly refining what I'm taking for food in my pack as well. So I try as new stuff comes out for backpacking food. I try it because sometimes find out I just like this better and replace something that I currently take, and constantly upgrading, I guess. So
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So you're talking about booking the hunts. We got off on food, which is great.
Yeah.
Any more things when booking a hunt?
Yeah. So a lot of guys always talk about this reference list. And I'm sure you've been asked for one 100 times. And I know they're usually, oh yeah, here's our reference list, call them. I never bother calling any of those guys. And the reason I don't call them, I shouldn't say I don't call them. I don't call them to find out how good the outfit or the hunt was. And the reason I don't call them is typically the guys on the list had a good experience. Maybe they got a good animal. They're typically going to give positive reviews. Regardless. So what I do, if I do call them, what I call them about is like details of the hunt, like they just stay in the tent, or things that are not relevant to how good the hunt was, but like kind of so I can
details.
Yeah, details on what what I can expect from it, because typically they're all going to say they had a good trip, and that's why they're on the reference list. But the guys that I actually do talk to are the guides, and most outfitters I've like on these bigger trips anyway, if it's a smaller trip it's a little different, but like on a big sheep trip, when you're tied at the hip with this guide, and it's like he's not a guide, he's your hunting partner, is the way I view that relationship. And so I typically will call them like in the off season before the hunt, and and just really ask him, what should I bring? Because the outfitter will have a list, but the guide usually has a little different take on what you should bring and what you don't need to bring. And I've always found that the guide that I'm hunting with and the outfitter's list aren't 100% in alignment. So that's the guy that I actually kind of trust to really tell me what the hunt is going to be like and what to expect, because they're the ones living it day in and day out. And, they're out there every day with you, and they want that hunt to go as good as it possibly can go, and they want you to be as comfortable as you possibly can be. And they're not going to give you a big story about, oh, you're going to shoot a Boone and Crockett, whatever. They're going to tell you what the realistic expectations are. Whereas if you're only talking to the outfitter, it's always going to, I shouldn't say it's always going to sound good, but it's more than likely always going to sound good. And I know in some cases it can build up false expectations. So I really do like talking to the actual guide themselves.
It's good advice.
Yeah. And then just the one other thing that's worth mentioning too is like these booking agents. So like today there's more of these hunting consultants than there's ever been before in history. I think like everybody's got their shingle out as a hunting consultant. There's probably really only a handful of them out there that have guys working the phones that have done a lot of these trips and have hunted with that outfitter they're trying to book you with and actually know what you're going to encounter when you go. Like I know I had one consultant, I won't mention the company they worked for, but they're talking to me and I was like, oh, I'm interested in, I can't even remember what species it was now. And they came back and it's like, oh, I got this guy and I got that guy. And well, they had all they had was a list of inventory they were trying to sell. They didn't actually know anything about
Yeah,
these
and they're
trips.
making a commission on the deal. So, I mean, people need to understand, like, and no disrespect to the booking agents out there are some good ones, but if the guy you're talking to hasn't been on that hunt, he really shouldn't even be talking to you about it. What he hears people say and what, some list or, that oh yeah, so-and-so's supposed to be good, but like I kind of take offense sometimes to the whole booking agent process, because it seems like you said there's, so many of them out there, and half of them have never even been on those hunts. And it's like, would you take, stock picking advice from someone that hasn't done extremely well picking stocks? Or would you, invest in real estate with someone that's never even owned real estate? And just because someone goes on one hunt doesn't mean that they're good or they have knowledge about another hunt. And that obviously you can tell from my voice, it's kind of picked a soft spot or a nerve with me, because it's turned into this big business. And it's it's great if you're talking to someone that's like, yeah, I've been on, 8 sheep hunts, I've killed 8 rams or 5 rams or 3 rams or 12 rams or whatever it is. Then you can go, okay, this guy's been there, he's done that, he knows what to expect. But like when you're talking to a guy and he's like, well, I actually haven't even gone on a sheep hunt yet. Well, you need to find someone else to talk to.
Not that one in particular, the sheep hunt ones. I've quit talking to consultants, period, about them, because I've found that 8 out of 10 of them have never been on a sheep hunt, number one. And number two, the guys that have been on one were with one guy in Alaska or with one guy here. Like they haven't been around. Like if the guy's killed 2 grand slams and has hunted with 15 different outfits, I'll talk to him all day long. But the average guy just has not hunted sheep in particular at very many places. It's just too expensive. The tag availability is low. It's just not a reality. Like if I ever drew a desert sheep tag, I'm going to talk to a guy like yourself. Yeah, you're the outfitter, but you've done it. You're well known. You know what you're talking about. You've killed many rams. You know what you're looking at. Like I'll talk to guy like you versus a guy that just wants me to book with you.
Yeah. Well, and I think to defend booking agents a little bit
Yeah.
too, if you talk to someone and they're like, I've only been on, if they say, I've only been on one sheep hunt, it was with this outfit, I had a good hunt. I can't tell you specifically, but I can tell you what I know from what people have told me, and here's some other references that you can call, and I'll turn you in the right direction. I just want to encourage the listeners out there to beware of some of these
Yeah.
so-called experts that really have not done it. And there are some fantastic booking agents out there that have a ton of experience. So
Yeah.
I don't want this to come across like they don't, or as an industry in general, because there's some great ones. But the other
Yeah.
thing is these guys are getting paid to book you.
Yeah.
So they're not going to tell you some things if they're getting, you got to watch that. And that's one
Yeah.
thing that's so frustrating, with this industry and this whole booking agent thing is like they're getting a commission whether they've
Mhm.
been there or not, but if you book, they're getting paid. So of course they're going to try and sell you on the deal. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think most of the listeners that listen to this podcast are savvy enough to know that, if they're being sold a bill of goods.
Yeah. And the other thing too, and this is what when I'm talking to one of these guys, what I always bring up too is I quiz them on like firearm laws or requirements, permits, getting the trophy import and export. Like especially if you're hunting in another country, or even out of like in this muskox example, I even had to have a permit to get it out of Nunavut, and that's a territory within Canada. They like you just have to know these things. So if you're talking to one of these guys and they don't know what permits you're going to need for whether it's for your rifle, for your animals, that's a bit of a red flag for me that they may not be as experienced as maybe they've led you to believe or whatnot, but they should be pretty knowledgeable in that stuff. And I have talked to some of these guys that, man, they could tell you the web address to go to print off the forms for XYZ permit, and this is the guy you talk to at this airport, and so there is some guys that are pretty knowledgeable, but just something to be aware of.
Yeah, I think you make some great points there, for sure, when talking about booking a hunt. And I think talking to your outfitter is one thing, but like I think a point you made is talking to your guide is a huge thing. Who are you going to actually be with in the field? Whether it's
Yeah.
a week or 10 day or 14 day or 21 day or whatever it is. I mean, like you're
Yeah.
going to have to feel like you have a common bond with this person.
Yeah.
So I think that's hugely important. Let's
And
talk about how much to pay.
okay, so this is a pretty interesting topic. So what I've found is, and I'm keep going back to sheep because sheep are like big money hunts. On like what I've found, especially in like some of these sheep hunts, you'll go on 10 different outfitters' websites. You'll find 10 different prices all over the map. And what I actually did before I did my stone sheep trip was I listed out like my top 5-10 picks for outfitters, the base price, and then I started making columns for all the extras. Like, okay, there's a charter flight on this one, there's extra tag fees on this one, there's trophy fees on that one. And when I laid that all out in a spreadsheet, at the end of the day, the total all-in cost, there really was two price points. And the one price point was the price points basically, the difference between the two hunts was, or what made up the difference was trophy quality and logistics to get to the area. So the more remote the area was, it was a bit more expensive, and then the general trophy quality in the area. So I know for like stone sheep, the north central part of BC has a little smaller rams than the Rocky Mountain Trench on the eastern side of the province, and the prices kind of reflect that. So there's a lot of, I don't want to say confusion, but there's a lot of ways these outfits can slice and dice their business and their product. So you really got to look at the whole picture before you book the trip, and really understand the total all-in cost. But typically, though, like if the hunt is, I'm just going to make up a number, say $10,000, you're not going to phone them up and book it for $5,000 on a normal day. There are some deals out there, but like basically cancellation type hunts. But before you put your name on a cancellation list, you should have full intentions of going if you get called, and don't just put it on there kicking the tires, and be prepared to drop everything you're doing and go. If you're a guy that can't leave everything on short notice, probably don't even put your name on one of those cancellation lists. I know a lot of my friends that are outfitters, they get kind of frustrated because everybody wants to be on this cancellation list, but none of them want to actually go on the trip when they get the call. So, but back to how much as well. Sorry, I digressed there. I'll just use a black bear trip for an example. If a black bear trip is selling for $4,000, you've looked at 10 outfits, and there's one for $2,500 and there's one for $7,000. Well, those are outliers, and you really got to ask yourself, why is this trip so cheap, or why is that one so expensive? And there could be legitimate reasons. Maybe the one that's that cheap is the guy's brand new to the business, just trying to get a few hunts under his belt, some pictures for his website, and just trying to get things kicked off, and maybe it'll be a great trip. But maybe the guy that's charging $7,000 or all that extra money, maybe he's got something exceptional there, like maybe you're staying at a 5-star lodge and eating filet mignon and drinking wine every night or whatnot. So there might be a reason for it, but typically if an outfitter's asking a price that's outside of what I'm going to call like a general threshold or price for that species, there's definitely some red flags that should be going up for you when you're looking at that.
For sure.
Yeah, and the tricky ones though would be some of the sheep and other type hunts where you might have extra support staff. So some outfits, they don't have a whole ton of extra help around. Like you might not have 2 or 3 spotters, you might not have an extra wrangler and whatnot, so maybe they can operate a little cheaper. But then another outfit, they might have 2 or 3 guys employed just spotting nonstop and looking. So yeah, the trip is going to cost a bit more in that scenario. So, but I guess the rule of thumb though is make sure if you're booking like a full price trip that you are staying within that standard deviation of what the industry's charging.
Okay. Talk about cancellation and last minute hunts. You touched on it before. One thing I can say is sometimes cancellation hunts, beware guys out there, sometimes cancellation hunts are not cancellation hunts. They pitch them as cancellation hunts, but they couldn't book them, and they're trying to use a fancy word to get them booked. What do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and they're pretty easy to sniff out, the unbooked hunts versus a true cancellation. So like a hunt that they just haven't booked, you might save a couple $1,000s on it. As a rule of thumb, a true cancellation, it'll be deeply discounted. Chances are the guy that booked it lost all of his money, and you've got 1 to 2 weeks to pack your bags and go on this trip. In the past 3-4 years, I'm going to say I've seen stone sheep hunts come available last minute for $10,000, which is, you would never book that anywhere near that on a normal day. So some guy or gal just couldn't go, lost all their money essentially, and the trip was available for someone else to fill the spot.
In that
Um,
situation, Chris, let's say it's a $30,000 hunt, and let's say that
yeah,
they've put a $15,000 deposit on it, so they have a $15,000, you know, um,
yeah,
remaining deposit, and it comes up cancellation hunt, $30,000 hunt, it'll cost you 15,000. In other words, the deposit that's already been made, that's gone. That person never gets that back,
yeah,
but someone's able to step in for the remaining balance in essence to fulfill, so the outfitter still gets his same amount of money. But
yeah.
in that case, have you also seen it in those numbers of 30 and 15? Have you seen it where they offer the cancellation hunt for the 15,000, or have you seen it where they offer it for 10, where it's even more discounted because it's 5 days away, and you have to be there on a plane, like you have to literally get on the plane that day, or in 3 days you got to go.
Yeah, what I've seen, or just, and this is just because I know a few outfitters that operate in the Yukon and BC and stuff, is they'll, before they advertise it, they'll call all the guys on their cancellation list and try to sell it for that 15. But if nobody's interested or can go on, that's on their list, and when they go to advertise it, quite often they'll even discount it a little more because it is, like you say, 3 to 5 days and you have to be here, just so they can get that trip sold. Because it's pretty hard to book somebody on a 10-day plus trip with a week's notice.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of it. So if you're a guy that can drop what you're doing, get holidays immediately and go, it's like a great option. And I know I've had my name on this one cancellation list with a friend of mine, and he'll call me almost every year. So they come up more often than the average guy thinks.
And I think that's another reason to be in shape and be ready. If you're looking for a stone sheep hunt, or you're looking for a doll sheep hunt, or whatever hunt you're looking for that time of year, be ready and be in shape. And
Absolutely.
like you said earlier, though, don't be on those lists if you're really truly not in it. If you're really the guy that can drop anything, with a day's notice or 2 days notice, be on those lists. If and there's not a lot of people that can do that either. I mean,
No.
they like to say they can, but the reality is, one, they're probably not in shape, ready to roll.
Yeah.
They probably don't have, gear that's pretty much ready to just be packed up and ready to go. So be
Yeah.
realistic with that and be fair to the outfitter, I would say.
Yeah. And like I know myself, I'm like a hunting nut. So I've got all my gear pretty organized in stuff sacks already. So if I need to walk out the door in an hour, I can have all the gear I need packed, ready to go. I can be walking out the house almost instantly. So like I'm ready to go if I get a call. But a lot of guys either never think they're going to get a call, or if they do get a call, they're almost surprised by it.
Yeah.
And like you say, is just be ready. And the other thing too, and a lot of guys don't really think about this, but if you are dead serious about this cancellation deal, you should actually know who you want to hunt with first. So don't be like putting your name on 15 outfitters cancellation lists. Figure out if you want to shoot a moose or a stone sheep or whatever. Figure out who you actually want to hunt with for that specific species. And what I've actually done in the past is I'll put a deposit down with those guys. Maybe it's only a couple $1,000s, but I'll say, I want to do this trip. I need to do it on a cancellation. I can't afford the full price on it, but I want to be the first guy that gets called when something comes up, and here's my deposit. And when you do that, they know you're serious. You got skin in the game at that point, and I could almost guarantee you will get a call.
Yeah, for sure. I think
Yeah.
you're exactly right. I think your microphone is rubbing up against your shirt or something. Just watch that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry.
Let's talk about the hunt itself and what to expect as a client going on the hunt.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, there's a lot of things that you should expect, but you should already know ahead of time before you show up. Like, are you getting picked up at the airport? Do you have to make your own way to camp? You know, what kind of food's provided? All this stuff. But at a basic level, you should expect to eat well. You should expect to eat often, and you should expect, based on what you're paying, a certain level of service. If you pay almost nothing, you shouldn't expect the same kind of level of service as the guy that paid 60,000 for a trip. So have realistic expectations on what you're going to get for your money. You should expect, that your tents or your cabins are in good shape. You shouldn't be staying in a tent that's leaking every time it rains. And, if you're using horses or trucks to get out to the hunting area, they should be, good working order, good animals, and, broke and ready to ride. You should basically be expecting that you're not going to lose time in your hunt because the outfitter's equipment failed. That's why they are outfitters, is they are outfitting you with all this gear, and that's why you paid them the money, or one of the reasons why. Anyway, the other thing too, which I think is absolutely critical or very important, is to help your guide out when you can. And if that's like doing dishes or saddling horses or splitting firewood or helping them break down camp or set it up, it just, you don't have to do it as a hunter. But when you do that stuff, chances are your guide's going to work that much harder for you. It's going to give you more time to hunt in the field because he's not having to spend all this time doing camp chores. And the more you help out and try to make things go smooth, it just seems like the hunt just goes that much better. That's what I've found anyways. And like a lot of these seasoned guides, say for saddling horses, a lot of them, they don't even want you to get in their way doing that because you're just in the way, and it's actually going to be longer if you try to quote help. But there is a lot of other stuff you can help out with around camp, and it just makes it that much better, in my opinion. Another thing you should really know too is like how much hiking and walking you're going to do. Like if, like you say, some of these guys show up on these trips, they're so out of shape they couldn't walk down a city street, let alone climb a mountain. So you really need to know how much hiking to expect, especially if you're questioning how in shape you are. And, if the guide tells you you're going to be walking X number of miles a day, you should, expect that and be ready for it. But like you said, that all goes back to being ready for these trips before you even go on them. Like once you're there, it's too late. So, the other thing too, with kind of like what to expect and what to do on a hunt, is take pictures and take as many of them as you possibly can. Like on a typical week, if I'm out on a hunt, I'll take at least 200 to 300 pictures. And, at the end of the day, when you get home, you don't just have a handful of trophy shots or hero shots.
Grip and grins.
Yeah, exactly. You've got like your whole experience documented. And I've always found that when I've gone through my pictures at the end of the trip, I was like, "Whoa, wow, this is really neat. I forgot I took that picture." And oh, wow, this is
One
great.
thing I can add to that, Chris, to help people out, because I'm a big picture taker too, and my hunting partner Dar is not so much.
Mm-hmm.
He just doesn't really make that a priority. He just never
Yeah.
has. And a lot of it has to do with my personality, his personality, his desire to have pictures or not have pictures. But one thing I can tell you to kind of get in the routine of is every time you stop in glass, take a few pictures. Every time you
Yeah.
stop to take your pack off to whatever, if you have to stop and you know recinch something down, take a few pictures. If you stop to rest, just whip out your camera, take a few pictures. And if you can kind of get in the habit of every time you kind of come to a stop and get a picture or two, or a 10, 15, 30-second video clip of whatever, by the time the hunt is over with, you actually have really good documentation of your hunt. And I've had people ask me before, like, how do you take more pictures? And if you can get disciplined about every glassing point you stop at, take a few
Yeah.
pictures when you start, take a few pictures before you put your stuff away. Then you pack up, you walk up the ridge, you get to another rock outcropping, take a few pictures before you even start glassing, take a few pictures before you throw your pack on. And by the end of the hunt, I mean, you will have an unbelievable, gallery of photos.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And like, a lot of these trips are hunt of a lifetimes. Like, you're probably not doing the trip twice in a lot of cases, especially if it's a expensive trip like a sheep hunt or some of these other ones. So, you're not going to regret, especially in this day and age with digital photography, taking more pictures than not. And, you can't go back and do it, take them twice. You can't go back and take pictures from yesterday. So, just like you say, be disciplined about it. And what I found really helps too is a lot of the guys will put their cameras in their backpack, but I always keep mine where it's handy and in a jacket pocket or somewhere where I can easily get to it, where I'm not digging around my gear for it. And I've found that really makes a big difference too for taking extra shots. So
For sure. Let's talk about guided hunt etiquette.
yeah, so this is a part that I want to talk about too, based on a lot of my conversations with some of my friends that are guides and wranglers. And um, if you just think about your personal life, if you treat people like garbage, they're probably not going to like you and they're not going to go out of their way for you. But if you treat them well, with respect, treat them like a human being, they're going to go out of their way for you. And a guide is no different. Just because you've paid to be on the trip doesn't mean that you shouldn't treat that person with a lot of respect. So what, you're a multimillionaire and that guide's making $25,000 a year. Like, you're a person just like he is. Treat them well, and a trip will guarantee will go a lot smoother. And then on any paid hunting trip, you can sit back and put your feet up and let the guide and support staff wait on you hand and foot. But like I was mentioning before, when you start pitching in around camp, like say you made a kill that day, you get back to camp quite late. Well, the guide maybe needs to tend the horses and do a few other things. Well, maybe you can go and start getting dinner that night ready and, get the campfire going or the stove going or do things to help out. Your guide will appreciate those extra little things that you're doing for them. And when it comes down to it, they're going to try a lot harder to get you something than a guy that might just be putting his feet up and kind of ordering you around camp. So, or ordering the guide around. And that brings me to my next point is, like, these guides they're your guide and you paid for the trip and they're working for you, but they're not your slave. If you need something or have suggestions what you might want to do to the hunt, let them know that and whatnot, but don't be barking orders. Don't tell them we're going here today and we're doing this now. And
don't guide the guide.
Exactly. Let the guide do his job. The guide is the leader on that trip. There's a reason you hired them. If you knew better than the guide, you'd be doing it yourself. So, that's probably a big thing. Like, I know I've talked to a couple guys that have never gone on a guided trip, but they're thinking about it, and they're just in their mind, they're almost like going to Africa where they got 15 people waiting on them hand and foot and whatnot. And I say, well, not like that at all. And
You know,
if you do make it like that, you're not going to have a good time, probably.
you know, I get quite a few direct messages on Instagram and emails and such, and I get some quite often. I get this, how come you don't have more DIY guys on? How come you have a lot of guides and a lot of outfitters? And my general response to them is most guides and most outfitters that I know are very, very good hunters. Most of
Yeah.
the best hunters that I know are guides.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
so, if anybody's listening out there and wondering why I have a lot of people on that are guides, is because they typically spend more time out in the field than the general DIY guy. Nothing wrong with the DIY guy, but for me as a podcast host, it's kind of hard to find guys that are DIY guys that spend more time than the guides. And so,
Yeah.
um, that's a point there that I think needs to be made. That eh, granted, there are situations where there's new guides or inexperienced guides, but
Hmm.
most guides that have done it for a while are very good at their, whatever hunt you're on with them. Most guides are pretty good at it, so I would say respect them. It doesn't matter if you make 40 times more than they do
Hmm.
in that particular application. They are better at it in most cases than you are, so learn from them.
Yeah, exactly. And you just got to think about it as if you were looking at yourself in your own job at the office, or if you're a tradesman at your trade. Um, you're honed in on your craft, and you are good at your craft, and you are working at your craft to be the best that you can be. And it's no different than these guides. Their job is to be a guide and to hunt, and their job is hunting, and they hunt exponentially more than the average guy, like hands down. And they hone their craft. They know their animals. They know the spots. They know how to glass. And like I say, when I say they know how to glassing is more than just throwing your binoculars up and scanning across the mountainside. Like it is an acquired skill, and a lot of people that don't do a lot of hunting don't understand that. But I can guarantee you that your guide is a far superior hunter than you are in 99% of the time for whatever species you're going with them for.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's talk about tipping. I know I get asked a lot about what
Yeah.
what is proportionate tips. Curious your take on that.
Hmm. So that's funny. I get asked this question. This is probably the number one question people ask me if they're going on their trip for the first time. And I tell them, like, on a smaller trip, like 10% is a good rule of thumb. So, like, if you're doing $3,000 bear hunt, or something to that effect, maybe a $300, like 10% is $300. That might be a fairly reasonable tip. Obviously plus or minus depending on the level of service or whatnot. I know on some group trips, like Caribou, for instance, a group of, like, say 8 guys might go in, and all 8 of you may only give $100, but you only might have one guide in that case. But the total tip is kind of proportionate to what the trip is. But on a bigger trip, like say a sheep hunt, man, I've heard of everything from gear to a couple $1,000s. And I'm not sure what guys have tipped you for sheep hunts, but you know it really seems to increase or decrease depending on the prestige of the species you're hunting, is what I've found. Um, what
One
Yeah, so go
one
ahead.
thing I would say is when I get asked the question, I say, well, okay, what would be any different than going on a guided hunt than, say, going to a restaurant? When you go to a restaurant,
Yeah.
a normal tip is 15%, a normal tip.
Hmm.
And so I tell people, So I'm gonna differ with you just a little bit.
Yep.
That's the thing. It's all across the board. But what I tell people, and obviously I'm an outfitter, so
Yep.
I'm not gonna say 5%. Normally I say 15%, and I've seen as high as 30, 40, 50% tips as well. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it just depends on how well you hit it off with your hunter, how well the guide is actually working. I've seen
Hmm.
hunters that are extremely happy with the way everything went down, and they give a very, very generous tip. I would say
Yeah.
you have to kind of play off the situation of how did it go, and
Yeah.
do you want to come back and hunt? And if you want to come back and hunt, and know that most guides and most outfitters, I mean, every little penny counts. So if you give them a,
Yeah.
18% tip, or you give them a 20% tip, and you may come back for one of those other species, they're going to be
Yeah.
tickled pink. So, keep that in
Yeah.
mind too, that, I try and treat people fairly, and treat them right. And I don't think it should be any different in your tipping. You should,
Yeah.
if you've got kind of not as good a service, or just kind of a standard service, then maybe 10% is fair. But if you've got someone that's really, really working hard, and really done a good job, personally, I don't see how it's any different than going to a restaurant where 15%, at least in the United States, I don't know how it is in
Yeah.
Canada, 15% is like that's the normal, that's what someone tips. And if someone was
Yeah.
at a restaurant and got less than a 15% tip, then they obviously know that either the person was cheap, because that's against the norm,
Yeah.
or that they did something wrong.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll bring up with that too is um, it really can depend on the person, like the hunter's economic situation too. So, say a sheep hunt, there's some guys that can write that check every year, go all day long. They don't even notice the money's gone. And like, you're absolutely right. They can afford to tip quite well. And I know there is some guys that, one example I just can think of off the top of my hand, my friend who's the guide was telling me about this. It was a school teacher from, I think it was like Mississippi or one of those states anyway. So never really made a lot of money, saved up his entire life to do this moose hunt in the Yukon. And so he went up there, they got a great moose. He was tickled pink, very appreciative. And at the end of it, he was kind of embarrassed because he didn't really have a tip or anything of significance for the guide. But my friend who was the guide, he's like, I no worries. Like, I appreciate that what situation you're in, and it is what it is, right? But like I would say, if you can afford it, which most people do in some of these bigger trips typically can, give a proper tip to reflect the level of service, especially when these guys have gone out of their way for you. It got like I've had on a couple of trips I've had it where we got back from a long hard day of hunting, and the camp cook has the fire in your tent lit, and first thing in the morning, before you're out of bed, they're back in there. They got the fire lit so it's warm when you get out, and to me that's going above and beyond. And so those people, like you say, every little bit helps, and if you can afford it, tip them properly and treat them well, and chances are you'll have lifelong friends out of them too.
Yeah, for sure. One thing you touched on a little bit at the beginning of the episode or the podcast was the boots that have worked for you. One question I would have with
Yep.
your mountain hunting, what gear, and this is probably a whole nother podcast, but
Yep.
what are you running as far as gear from head to toe, and what have you found works best for you?
Okay. So I'm not one of these guys that'll get like a specific brand and be totally outfitted with it. I'll get the very specific things that I like, that I think are exceptional from each of these brands or companies or whatever that works for me specifically. So like I'd mentioned earlier, my boots are hand wags. And if I ever had to or next time I have to buy a pair of boots, I'll definitely get the exact same ones. Just they work for me. They're perfect for me, and no issues. So I'll get those again. For a jacket, I've got the Kuiu guide jacket, and to give you an idea of how long ago I've got this jacket, I got it when they were still made in Canada. So it's actually got a made in Canada label on it,
which is like
and
2010, like one of the first generations.
Exactly, and I love that jacket. I wear it virtually every trip. I wear it, and for how thin those jackets are, they are exceptionally warm. I have no idea why, but like I'm wearing that guide jacket in November moose hunts in Canada when it's snowing outside, and I'm not having an issue staying warm. So absolutely love that jacket. They're not advertised as waterproof, but they are somewhat water repellent to a point. So that's definitely, I don't go anywhere without that jacket. Then under that jacket, like if I'm hunting in later season up here, I'll have like a wool sweater, and then some kind of a base layer with merino wool, or some kind of a zip up long underwear shirt or something to that effect. And then always I will have hiking pants, and if it's cold enough, I'll have like a Polar Tech long underwear, something like that underneath them. But I used to hunt in jeans all the time, and Alberta's fairly dry in the fall, so I never really had an issue. But when I went to Alaska, man, I was soaked right away with jeans. But when you're wearing the hiking pants and some of these other synthetics that wick moisture, you can actually get dry fairly quickly, even if it is damp outside. So even like when I went up to Nunavut for this muskox, it's 35 below out. All I wore for pants was my hiking pants that I would have on a sheep trip, and a pair of long underwear underneath it. And obviously I had like some ski pants on top of that, but just keeping dry at that base layer is so critical. And after I got that kind of figured out, man, it sure made a world of difference being comfortable. And then the other thing too that often gets overlooked is socks. I basically only wear these smart wool socks now. I think they're I want to say merino wool, and I think probably some kind of synthetic blend, but I've never had an issue wearing them. They wick moisture away from your feet. They just really work well for me anyways. The last thing you never want to wear, in my opinion, is cotton. If you can stay away from cotton when you're on these backpack trips, don't even bring it, because you won't get it dried out. But that'd kind of be my biggest piece of advice, is just avoid cotton like the plague.
Yeah. Okay. We've got some other things on our outline here, but I'm going to tell you the green drakes are starting to hatch here in the Roaring Fork Valley, and I've got appointment on the river tonight, so I'm going to have to run. But talk about post-hunt, what you need to do as a hunter.
So there's a bunch of stuff, and I'm assuming after you already got home and your travels are done, you're going to want to take some time to digest the trip that you just been on. And what I mean by that is, think about what went well, what didn't, what might you've done differently next time, or what you could have done better, what you liked about the outfit, what you didn't. Because I'll tell you one thing, when I did my first trip, that one to Alaska, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. I thought I wanted this, super rugged DIY style backpack hunt where we're living day to day out of our packs and, suffering kind of for the sake of the hunt almost. And then after I did it, I was like, this trip would have been a whole lot better if it was just a wee bit more comfortable. So, after you do a trip or two, you'll really hone in on what you're looking to get out of a hunt, like a guided hunt specifically, and what you want for comfort, and maybe packing that extra pound or two for a better tent will make all the difference in the world. Maybe or a sleeping bag or whatever the case may be. But once you get home, average guy should really debrief yourself, I guess, really, and kind of understand why things went the way they did, whether they went successful or not successful. Just really understand what contributed to that, and then the next time you go to do a trip, even if it's a DIY trip, you can kind of put that knowledge towards the next hunt you do.
Yeah, and I think you got to self-evaluate. I mean, I think you got to look at where maybe on your end you weren't ready, or things that you did wrong, or things that you would do different to make yourself better on the
Yeah.
next opportunity, and be a little bit self-aware of your weaknesses and where you could increase your strengths for the next opportunity. I
Yeah.
think is huge, and I think self-evaluation is a huge factor that I think a lot of people, they can blame everything else, but very rarely do they take a look at maybe where they could have done a better job.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and
And
I think that's what makes great hunters, is people that are willing to laugh at themselves a little bit, and willing to be hard on themselves when maybe they didn't prepare correctly, or maybe they didn't bring the right gear, and didn't
yeah.
take it as serious. And I think if you can get more like that, you can become a more efficient machine, when you're going on these hunts.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like one of the biggest shortcomings a lot of um, adventure hunters have is, especially first time adventure hunters, is they think they're in better shape than they actually are. And I'm guilty of it myself. Like I try to go out at noon every day, like, because I live a pretty sedentary lifestyle, working Monday to Friday in an office. So I try to get out at noon every day and go for a walk for a half hour, an hour, just kind of get moving and do a lot of stuff on the weekends. And I've fooled myself on one or two occasions where I thought, I'm actually not in too bad a shape here. And then you get out to the mountain and you're like, man, what was I thinking? I was in nowhere near the kind of condition I should be in.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to fool yourself into thinking you are in better shape, especially if you're not overweight, and if you're a naturally lean guy. It's really easy to talk yourself into thinking that you're in quite good shape. And I'm sure you've seen that with a lot of clients too. They'll show up and, you're going for a sheep or a mule deer or whatever, and you're hiking out and they get turned back and they're sitting there panting, and, yeah, it's just no fun for anybody when you're out of shape.
I've been on those hunts, and I've also been where I wasn't in the condition that I needed to be in. So I've seen both sides
Yeah.
of the, being realistic, I've seen both sides of that story, and I just think people need to be more self-aware with what they've got going on, and be honest with themselves.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground. We have more on our outline here, but
Yep.
I want to thank you for your time, and congratulate you on the success that you've had, and look forward to the day, when you get drawn in one of these states for your desert, so you can complete your Grand Slam. I think that'll be an awesome accomplishment. I want
Yeah, it'll be great.
to thank you for your time. I also want to thank the sponsors of this podcast, GoHunt.com, Insider. If you use the JScott promo code, you're going to get a $50 store credit to the new Go Hunt gear shop. Use the JScott promo code for that. The Kuyu Ultralight Hunting, I want to remind the listeners out there that the Kuyu World Tour, the mobile showroom, is going to be in, let's see here, June 20, let's see, starting June 29th, Boise, Idaho through July 1st, then Idaho Falls, Bozeman, Montana, July 13th through the 15th, Denver, Colorado, July 20th through the 22nd, Colorado Springs, Omaha, Nebraska, Kansas City, Missouri. You can go on Kuyu.com and find out where that mobile showroom is going to be. Every size, every piece of gear that Kuyu makes will be at the mobile showroom. You can try it on, you can feel it, and the overwhelming response from KUIU customers out there is just been awesome, with people getting to actually, feel it before they try it on, know exactly what size and what have you. It's been phenomenal. Also, the Outdoorsman's in Phoenix, Cody Nelson and his crew. If you use the J Scott promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount. And phonescope.com. If you use the J Scott promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount there when you purchase um, any product there at Phonescope. Chris, I want to thank you for your time, and yeah, it's just been awesome. We've covered a lot of ground, and
Yep.
keep up the good work with your job, and look forward to the next hunt. And I want to let people know, I want you to let people know how they can follow you, or how they can get a hold of you, or what have you on social media or whatnot.
Yeah. So I'm on Facebook. Just if you Google Chris Maxwell, and I think there's a couple of us, but I'm the guy with the sheep on the profile. I'm also on Instagram at Rocky underscore mountain underscore ram underscore hunter. So Rocky Mountain Ram Hunter with the underscores in between the words. And I post a few videos and some pictures on there. Um, Mostly all hunting related type stuff. And I think I even posted a little picture of a muskox video I took when I was up north there this spring. It's kind of neat to see the herds there. So, and then I also write a little column for a magazine called Big Game Illustrated, and I think it's published here quarterly. So you can check out some of my stuff on there if you like.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for spending time with us, and thanks to the listeners for your loyal support here of this podcast. I'm gonna go try and drown some green drakes and see if I can catch some fish tonight. Here in the Roaring Fork Valley, it's the rivers have finally just cleared, and the drakes are kind of hatching that last 30 minutes of light. So I'm off, gonna go fish with my buddy Eldine tonight, and gonna have a good time. So thanks everybody for listening. Thanks Chris for your time, and until next time, God bless.